that she has seen throughout successful business intelligence implementations. During our presentation, I'm sure a bunch of people are going to have questions. We ask that you enter your questions into the questions button over on your GoToWebinar console. And at the end of the presentation, we will answer all your questions, and also midway through our presentation, we're going to have a poll, interactive poll with a couple questions that we'd love to get everybody involved in, and really want to get a gauge on where people and organizations fall regarding business intelligence. So without further ado, Diana.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning to those of you in California. Good afternoon to everybody else. Thanks for coming. As Jeff said, I've been working in business intelligence for longer than I'd like to admit. I remember when diskettes were new, but at any rate, I've been involved with a lot of business intelligence type of implementations and projects, and some of them went rather poorly, and some of them went very successfully. And I'd like to say that the ones that went poorly didn't take my advice, but the ones that were successful did. But that may or may not be the case. At any rate, I wanted to actually do this webinar. I asked them to let me do it so that I could share some of my experiences when it comes to things that really make a difference, either negatively or positively, when it comes to implementing your business intelligence project. BI really needs to be considered at the center of your healthcare universe. If you're in the healthcare industry, even especially now, people are more and more attuned to that fact. It's the number one reason why you'd even want an electronic health record system. Without it, it's hard to make sound decisions. It's hard to operate efficiently. It's hard to get a handle on the future based on what you've done in the past. So I consider it really, really integral. And here you can see, it being at the center of the universe. Is virtually no aspect of the healthcare universe that is not basically orbiting your data. It's been something that other industries have realized actually a lot sooner than the healthcare industry. Manufacturing and distribution and retail all really got into using electronic record keeping very early on, and you can see what kind of evolutionary advances they've made because of that. And even though maybe it took a government mandate for healthcare to come out of the dark ages, I think it's going to be absolutely revolutionary in terms of where the healthcare industry goes to implement business intelligence. I love this graph. I borrowed this graph from a study that I saw, and it was published by Actuate Corporation, if you know who they are. If you want to Google it, it's the 2013 Wisdom of Crowds Business Intelligence Market Study. And it basically shows what the participants felt were the most important benefits of doing a BI implementation. And this is across multiple industries, so it's not just healthcare shown here. But the most important, of course, was better decision making. Hard to make good decisions if you're flying blind. Improved operational efficiency was second. Growth in revenues was third. Increased competitive advantage was fourth. And then enhanced customer service was fifth. In the healthcare industry specifically, the top three were the better decision making, the improved operational efficiency, and enhanced customer service, which really translates to better quality patient care, was number three. So, I think that those are the top three things that people in healthcare go after BI implementations for. And if you're going to implement a business intelligence system, what you really need to do is to set up the BI infrastructure as a very important part of your overall EMR implementation. If you don't set that block in the right position up front, it's not going to support the needs of your organization later on. So what I wanted to do basically is offer my insights and my opinions on what I think helps and what I think actually hurts when people are trying to put these things together in EMR implementation. So I developed basically my top 10 lists. I'm going to try not to read them like David Letterman, but at any rate, my top 10 pitfalls, and I captioned this, why it's hard to keep good reporting people, because some of the most prevalent reasons that I hear report developers and BI team members complain about their environments are some of the things that are in this list. Good BI people are really hard to find. There's an awful lot of incompetence out there. There's an awful lot of newbies out there, and it's because the industry really for healthcare is very new. So being good, who are experienced, really be a priority. And let's talk about some of the pitfalls. I think the biggest mistake that a lot of organizations make when they start to plan their EMR project is not involving the BI team from the get-go. It is so easy somehow for them to forget that how the data is put into the system has the biggest impact on your ability to analyze it and report on it later than anything else. If you're involved in planning and validating your EMR implementation, you've got to understand that the data that you're going to put in and the workflows that you're going to use to do that have to fit in with other parts of the system and have to be put in a way that is reportable. If you want to document on it, you've got to make it reportable. It has to make sense from a data standpoint. I'll give you a case in point. I worked with an organization implementing Epic, and they had a mandate to report to the Justice Department about how well they were serving the deaf and hard of hearing community. And what they had to do basically was to ask each and every patient and every patient's companion that came with them whether they were deaf or hard of hearing, and if so, whether they needed any interpretive or device assistance. And unfortunately, the way that the build team put things together for documenting this information made it really impossible to tell what information related to the patient and what information related to the companion. They could see everything just fine from their standpoint in the application, and they could tell. But as far as the data on the back end was concerned, there was no way to tell. So the whole workflow needed to be restructured. And, BI didn't even know that this was a requirement and that anybody was working on it until after the go live. So that's a little late to be invited to the party. So everything that you document in the system that is remotely possibly going to be analyzed later or used in any kind of an important way should be run by a business intelligence team member. I love this. It's so true. Every request becomes an emergency. There are so many opportunities to set expectations and set priorities, and very few organizations do this well. Most of the time, users don't really know what they want, never mind what they need, until they hit a roadblock kind of late in the game. They think about, I had this report on my legacy system, and I assumed I was going to have this report in my new system. How come I don't? And so having that information becomes a last-minute emergency when no doubt the BI team is on top of a mountain of other requests. So this becomes a real problem, and it causes a lot of frustration, not only in the BI team, but also with the users, because they get disillusioned by the BI team if they can't get what they need on an emergency basis. There are lots and lots of different methodologies out there, lots of buzzwords for ways to do IT development. One of them is the traditional waterfall approach, and it basically involves kind of a linear process where you start out with a requirement specification, and hopefully that's fairly complete, and then that's given to the developer, and the developer writes it, tests it, and delivers it, and it's all, like I said, it's all sequential. And that works fine in a lot of other industries, like in manufacturing that works fairly well, because frankly, if you stop a process in the middle and try to make changes, that's going to cost a lot of money in manufacturing. But it does not make a lot of sense when it comes to software development or BI development, because people don't know what they want. People realize what they want once they start seeing what they're getting. Those results often cause workflow changes. And if you don't come back and use an iterative methodology, people get the impression you're not working on their stuff. So you have to use a more agile development methodology, and a lot of companies do not do that, or they don't know that that should be the upfront plan. There is often nobody responsible for a particular project or for the quality of its data. I think data governance is actually a buzzword that a lot of people don't understand, but it is a very, very broad term, a part of which involves the commitment by someone to ensuring that a particular BI project and the data that it uses are correct, high quality, accurate, and so on. And report requests will come flying into your BI team with nobody on it to answer the questions, nobody to take responsibility for determining whether or not the data is valid. You just sort of fly by the seat of your pants when you're developing it, and everybody's passing the buck. And going back also to the idea of data governance, there is very frequently a very poor consensus amongst the main users as to the purpose and the definition of the data. I see this a lot in financial application implementations, especially across multiple organizations who are now putting together their organizations into one EMR. For example, you know, one organization might consider a valid inpatient admission to be someone who has come in and been put in observation. Another might consider that not to be an inpatient admission. What do you consider an outpatient visit? Do you consider like series visits for therapies? Are those every visit considered a visit, or are you going to count them once for each month that they come in, or whatever? And if you don't get consensus up front, what you end up with is a report that works for one group of people but does not work for the rest of the people who have to use it later on. Then you end up with lots of frustration and meetings that are unnecessary. And that's just one example, but it goes across the board, even into ClinDoc. You can't make reports brew coffee, okay? One report cannot do everything, and everybody wants their reports to do everything. I run into so many situations where somebody has everything on an Excel spreadsheet somewhere that they've copied and pasted to, and they want this new system to come up with exactly the same thing. And that there should actually be a policy that says we're not going to develop reports that already have you know, existing reports to supply part of the information. But you end up with a tremendous number of redundant reports. You end up with frustrated report developers because there's, you know, more and more and more requirement being added to the same report, the project never ends. And that's frustrating to everyone. I'm a firm believer, and I think, a lot of people may disagree with this, but I don't think that nurses and people who have been in the front end, the battleground, are necessarily good BI people. I think that to some extent it has a tendency to slow down your BI implementation really, really in significant ways. It takes kind of a special kind of mind to work with data. It's not brain surgery, but sometimes it can look like brain surgery. I mean, for example, Epic's SQL data model called Clarity, which I work with a lot, it has, I think, something like 18,000 tables and views in it. So being able to figure out what goes together with what and how to pull the data is really complicated. And not everybody has the mindset to figure those things out. It isn't enough to have played around with Excel or played around with Access or to have run reports before. I think you really need to look at your BI staff as being people who really have that kind of wiring, as it were, and a lot of BI teams do not do that. They do tend to bring people in from non-technical areas of the organization. Consultants. There are a lot of us out there, goodness, but I think a lot of organizations use consultants in a way that is not conducive to success, frankly. I think there are a lot of bodies out there who can create a lot of reports, but they are not able to bring their expertise and their experience to your internal staff and to mentor them. You're paying a lot of money for a consultant, and yes, they should be able to help you pare down the workload, but they should be used as mentors to bring your people up to speed. And what happens is, if you bring all these bodies in just to write reports, when they leave you with a mess. And that mess goes on for years and years and years because people later on who have to maintain their stuff don't know what they did. Or they don't have the skills to do what they did. So use consultants differently, and I'll get to that in a little bit more later. I see this a lot. There's a silo around every report developer. I don't see a lot of BI teams actually working as teams for multiple applications. What happens is that the team is set up with a couple of team members specializing in this application area and a couple in another application area, but they never get together and they never talk about the common aspects of the data that they're working with. And even worse, the experienced developers really don't spend any time mentoring the newer developers. They keep to themselves and they keep their knowledge to themselves. And it's a waste of your resource talent. It's a waste of their experience. It's not conducive to knowledge transfer. It is a real problem if you have somebody who decides to leave and you don't have anybody else who knows anything about what they've been working on. Finally, last pitfall. It's not the last pitfall I could think of. It's just number 10. There is no oversight of quality programming, compliance with standards, and no oversight that documentation is being done. I am one of the biggest proponents I know of documentation and of relying on standards. One of the worst things you can do is to let people go after their projects using whatever methods and standards they have gotten used to from their prior employment. There are a lot of very bad habits out there, and those bad habits can multiply throughout as many reports as that person with the habit, works on. And then when things start to break down, or somebody else needs to, debug that particular set of reports, it becomes a serious problem for them to even understand what that person was doing. Performance issues come into play, especially when a report was written without large amounts of data in mind. That happens a lot with financial transactions, for example. You come up with a report and it looks nice and it comes up with the right numbers, but if you don't have quality best practices for how you treat data efficiently, then later on down the road that report's not going to work anymore. What happens ultimately with that is that you have users, number one, who look at the reports and they see a big difference in the quality of reports done by one person versus done by another. They see differences in format, and they say, well, this must have been a model report, this one must have been done by reporting. So, they will blame you for some things and not blame somebody else for their problems, and then basically they get unhappy and they start losing faith in the data. Now it is time for that poll that Jeff was talking about, and I hope you all participate in it, because I think it'll be interesting to see what you all have to say. Jeff?
Absolutely, and Diane, I'm sure many of the individuals on this webinar are kind of nodding their head to a lot of the pitfalls that I'm sure many of you have seen yourself. So thanks for that information and your insight in that. For this poll, we've got a series of 3 questions. The first one is just, what is the average experience level of your BI and reporting staff? It's a 1 to 5, 1 being novice, so very, very entry level, all the way up to experts. And to explain a little more in detail, love to have Diana give her thoughts.
I made up the poll. So what I was thinking essentially is that, a novice is somebody who maybe has used Excel and maybe run some reports, but is interested in learning more. Early stage would be somebody who perhaps has used another database program, a simple one like Access, or maybe they've developed a couple of simple Crystal reports, but they really don't have a lot of database experience. Intermediate people, I would say, should be good at Crystal reports or good at Microsoft SQL Server reporting services, and they should really be familiar with some SQL. They should be able to write some basic views in SQL. An advanced user should be able to write more SQL. They should be able to write SQL commands. They should be able to write views. They should understand indexes. They should be able to use some of the advanced functions of whatever reporting tool they're using. They should be able to even, I'm going to say, go so far as to be able to schedule their reports using tools like SSIS or business objects. And then finally, the person who walks on water, the expert, they write advanced stored procedures, they write commands and functions, they care about performance and understand how to determine and troubleshoot performance issues. They know the tool set very, very well, SSIS for extract, transform, and load kind of things, ETLs. They understand analysis services or Webby, and they can prepare data that way. So those are the choices that I gave you.
Great, and we're getting some great participation. Thank you very much. We'll leave it open for 5 more seconds or so, so get your last votes in, and we'll move on to the next. So the next one is, where do you gauge your organization regarding BI and business intelligence usefulness? So, one being everything from, we have no consistent definition of what our truth really is, to all the way up to we are using the data to really enhance clinical effectiveness. Diana, do you mind shedding a little light on your thoughts on those?
No problem. Yeah, what I wanted to really get at was, what are you getting out of your business intelligence right now? Are you getting a lot of predictive analysis, which would be on the upper end? Do you have on the lower end? You have completely disparate systems that don't agree with each other. People are using many access databases to record information, and there really is no sense of cohesion in your data.
Great, thank you. So we'll leave that open for just 1 or 2 more seconds. We almost have 100% voted. And we will shut that down, and we will end with an easy one at the end. But, this one is just, do you and your organization feel like you have the current adequate staff to really handle your BI requests? And we made this one easy. It's yes, no, or maybe. So
I don't think I have to explain that one.
No, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. So we'll leave that open for 5-10 seconds, and then we'll go and review the results and see if anyone's surprised. So we'll leave that open for 5 more seconds. All right. Thank you all for participating. Now I'm going to go back and share the results. So, the question regarding the average level of experience regarding about your business intelligence and reporting staff, we're right in the middle, kind of 25% are early stage, 50% feel like they're intermediate, and then we have a quarter of the participants feel that they are in the advanced stage. No novice and no expert. Diana, do you, what's your thoughts on that?
That actually looks about right. I think, as people start to take BI more seriously, they are looking for staff that has the right kind of skill set, and if they don't, then they're bringing them up to speed, which I think is good. So I'm actually happy to see that. I prefer to see more advanced and expert, but I predict we'll get there.
Absolutely. So that's a good one. The second question, we've kind of got all across the board on this one, just in regards to where do you gauge your organization regarding BI usefulness, and 17% says they have no consistent definition of truth. 33% have started to work on data governance. 17% said they've started to automate delivery of data, and 33% are saying that they're using data to enhance clinical effectiveness. So kind of a vast array of answers. Are you surprised, Diana?
Yeah, a little bit, if only because another webinar that I attended actually on my own had a little bit more of a spread of different options on this, and most of the people who attended that one thought they were somewhere between level 1 and level 2. I'm glad to see some people who are now starting to use their data for some predictive analysis. I think that's excellent. I'm not at all surprised about people in the level 1, 2, or 3 at all. The self-service delivery, that will come.
Great. And finally, the easy one. Do you feel like you have adequate staff to really handle your BI pipeline? And 33% say yes, 50% say no, and 17% say maybe.
That I'm not surprised about at all.
At all.
No. I think that as people are becoming more aware of the needs to have a business intelligence plan, they become aware of the number of requests that they're going to get and the number of requests they have, and their staff starts getting overloaded.
Well, and especially one of the pitfalls you mentioned is everybody feels like their request is an emergency, so that
Yeah.
sense of urgency is probably pretty intense. So, but thank you everybody
Yeah.
for participating. We'll turn it back over to Diana for her second part of her presentation.
All right. Okay, so now let's talk about what people are doing right, at least from my perspective. And the first thing that I think people do right is to get top-level management to understand and to support the role that business intelligence plays in the upfront build and the upfront decisions made about workflow. I've worked at a client that did a great job of this. They have an actual director of analytics, and this is a guy who really cares about delivering business intelligence to the users. And so he's in a position to really go after the rest of the C-suite and say, hey, you know, the people who report to me are the people who are going to make a difference in what can be reported on and seen in the data and manipulated, so on and so forth. So please, you know, support us by making sure that everybody else hears that and plays along with it. I think another really, really good thing to do, and that has made a big difference in some of the situations that I've been involved in, is to know up front what you're going to use for tools, what you're going to use for development tools, for delivery methods, for, you know, extracts, for example. You know, if you know up front that the methodology you're going to use for data extracts is going to be using SQL and then exporting using SSIS, then from the get-go, that's how your extracts will be done, and they will be consistent, as opposed to having some of them being done using a reporting tool and some of them being done using Excel and some of them being done using some other method. Making a decision about, you know, where the data goes to, like a shared folder or an FTP site or SharePoint, is also good because it allows users to know what to expect and where to expect data to go. Decide on whether or not you're going to use self-service options and what kind of self-service options you're going to use. If you're going to create a web portal for people, that's great. If you're going to use something like a crystal viewer for people to use and view their own crystal reports, that's great. But make sure that you have a plan on how exactly you're going to allow users to get their own data. Another one that's big is if you can decide up front how you're going to deliver scheduled reports, that will make a huge difference. For example, using report bursting. I think one of the best situations I ever saw was that they knew up front they were going to have financial reports that had to be sent you know, to 50 different people across the organization, some of whom wanted PDFs and some of whom wanted Excel spreadsheets. And rather than creating individual scheduled instances, one that goes to this person that way and one that goes to another person the other way, they knew up front they were going to use report bursting. So they trained their people and they set it up, and later on the maintenance of those schedules was much easier. Much, much easier. And there are also some very, very good products out there on the market that help with batch scheduling and make that kind of maintenance very, very easy to do. So if you plan ahead for what kind of tools you're going to use, you're going to have a consistent and much smoother implementation of business intelligence overall. And your team will thank you for not confusing them. I mentioned self-service reporting just a second ago, and I am a huge, huge proponent of giving people the power to get what they need. And most people who use computers for looking at data and making decisions, can run a report themselves, and it's kind of discouraging for most of them to have to wait for somebody else to run a report for them. So that's one of the reasons that I think self-service reporting is one of the things that makes for a very successful BI implementation. If you can give people the ability to run a report flexibly, different parameters, different ways, export it, and so on and so forth, then you're, number one, giving them that kind of power. You're taking the onus away from the reporting team to have to run things. You are also, by the way, safeguarding from data being separated from the source database, which is one of the things that happens when you export raw data to Excel. A lot of people who are frustrated because they can't run the reports and manipulate the data the way they want to, ask for dumps of raw data so they can play with it in Excel. And the problem is when you do that, now all of a sudden the source of truth is separated from the data, and people can accidentally or intentionally change the data in an Excel spreadsheet and misrepresent on a report. So I'm not a big proponent of data dumps. I'm a big proponent of giving people data, however. So there are a lot of different tools out there I mentioned. You've got the SAP product line like Webby, InfoView, you've got Microsoft's products, SSRS, SSAS, analysis services, integration services. You've got products like ClickView. There's some new things out there that bring data into memory so that the response time is much, much faster when you're slicing and dicing your data. So I like when people go out and look for additional tools out there to provide better self-service to their users. Make sure that there is a realistic and flexible prioritization methodology in place up front. Know what you're going to use for qualification for particular priorities of people's requests. So, for example, if you know that something that affects patient care is going to be more important than just a list, or something that affects regulatory reporting is slightly less important than a patient care issue, then make sure that you have a prioritization system that takes those things into account. But more importantly, make sure that that prioritization system and the queue is visible to everyone. Most people don't realize that their report isn't the only report that's been requested. If they see what's been requested, what's currently being worked on, what's in the queue, what priority it has, you're going to have much more understanding users. They're going to see, oh yeah, well, I can understand that they would want to do this particular government regulatory report before mine. And yeah, we only have 5 people, so I'll give them a break. That makes things a lot easier. Get experienced database people. Get people who know how to put data together. Cut your training cycle. Don't bring people in, as I said, from the front-end applications and expect them to become experienced database coders. Get them from the start. There's a lot of great people out there, not all of them with great communication skills, though. So make sure that you have people who really can talk with users and without getting into all kinds of technical garbage. You don't have to explain, joins between tables to people. You have to be able to explain in plain English that the way that the data that you have is organized makes it very difficult for you to retrieve it, or makes it very easy for you to retrieve it. So you really need to get a quality BI team in place. Otherwise, the users see a huge difference in the the quality and the capabilities of the different people on your BI team, and they'll end up wanting this person to work on it instead of that person to work on it. So the ones that have been really successful have really had excellent BI teams and have really, really brought them up to speed in terms of database skills. I am also a documentation freak. I think one of the best things you can do to have a successful BI team is to set good standards, make sure people understand best practices, put in place reasonable but not overly restrictive change controls, and require documentation. Enforce these things. If you have to spend a lot of time down the road figuring out what someone did, that's going to slow you down. But when something is really well documented, anybody on the team can figure out what the person was trying to do, what this was for, and how to fix it if there's a problem. So standards are important. Formatting standards are important so that one person's reports don't look different from another person's reports. They should all look like they came from the same application. Best practices in terms of, what kinds of coding methodologies are used. Reasonable change controls. Don't make report developers go through the kind of change controls that an application developer might go through. And you're going to have a much, much smoother implementation. And I've seen that in like 2 out of the last 3 clients that I were at had much, much looser change controls for reporting than they did for application build. And it totally made sense because application build is a process that affects actual data. Reporting does not change data, and it is usually going on much faster than build is. Report stewards need to meet face-to-face with the BI team and with the users who are requesting data, either on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis during a project, all right? Because they need to review where the project is at, and they need to pay attention to answer questions. And the reason that I say face-to-face is because although I love GoToMeeting and I love WebEx and I, Skype with my daughter all the time, there's something about, number one, a face-to-face, visual cues as to whether someone is understanding you. It also means that they're taking time to sit down with you. Therefore, they're taking ownership and responsibility and care about this project. So if they're not willing to make the time to meet, then they're considering this project as important as you do. So everything stalls if things don't keep moving. And I also think one of the things that really works out best with this kind of development methodology is that your users will see the progression of the particular project. So they don't wait until the very end. They see the stage of development. They can offer input and insight and changes and so on and so forth. So that's something that I've seen very, very well done, and it really has made a very big difference in how quickly report development turns things around. Please give your BI team the authorities and the tools that they need to do their job, and make sure that the skill sets are shared at least 3 deep in your team. I've worked in environments in which privileges and authorities were very, very limited. And what I mean by that is the people who developed the reports did not have the authority to create views or stored procedures. They had no authority to look at production data. They had no authority to schedule jobs or test scheduled jobs. And what that, what happens with that is they have to wait until somebody gets around to doing it for them. But you know, really good people will do a really good job if they're given the ability to do it. And I'm a firm believer in that. And the places that I've been that had that kind of an attitude where I could, you know, step up to a project and take it from the very beginning all the way to the point at which it's ready to go into production, completely and utterly tested in all aspects of it, were the teams that churned things out and really, really got a lot done. We talked about siloed team situations, and I think, again, you've got to spread the knowledge around. So BI teams that have shared knowledge and at least 3 people who can cover any particular stage of development are good, efficient teams. You also have to let reporting use production data. In an environment in which you're developing code for an application where you need to test whether data is being updated or inserted or deleted properly, I can totally understand that you don't want to use production data. But there is nothing less meaningful to a user than looking at a report in development that shows test data. Reporting has to use production data or a copy of production. And every site that I've been to where they set up a development database and the authority to read the production database were much more efficient in developing reports. You recognize the information, the user recognizes the information, you know that that information reflects the way it is going to be put in the future, and so you can rely on it and you can trust it. And by the way, you also end up finding problems with the data that then somebody can take responsibility for cleaning up. So meaningful data needs to be provided. Now, it doesn't have to be the actual production database. It can be a copy of the production database. In fact, I had a situation where we actually replicated only the tables and views from our production database to a separate database. So it wasn't even the entire 18,000 plus tables and views from Epic, from the Clarity database. It was only the subset of those tables and views that were actively being used on a report. So that worked much, much better. Use consultants, but also use experienced internal people to share and to mentor the other people on the team. If you're going to use consultants, bring in people who know what they're doing and can teach your people what to do. Obviously, they should also be able to do the work, okay? But if you bring someone in who not only does the work but also leaves your people able to do the work, you're going to be miles ahead. And you're also not going to fall off a cliff when that person leaves. If you have your internal BI people who are really experienced in a particular thing mentor and share their knowledge with the less experienced people, then you have a much, much more secure knowledge base and experience base, so that when one person leaves, you don't lose all the knowledge that went with that person. So that makes for a much, much smoother transition over time. So those are my top 10 good things to do. So let me wrap up. Basically, in order to create an environment in which business intelligence is known and treated as an integral success, part of the success of an EMR, you have to get executive level sponsorship of all BI initiatives. You have to have somebody who's like the director of analytics who can talk to the CIO and say, hey, decisions are being made by the clinical people that are not conducive to reporting. Let's make sure that they know we need to be involved. Make sure that the BI people are involved. Make sure that they can communicate with the clinical people about why the build and the workflow needs to be a certain way. Make sure that your team mentors itself and shares knowledge and skills. You may have one or two people who are really good in one application area. Have them share that information with people who aren't as familiar with that data model, for example. You're going to get a lot better results if you have someone who's worked with a particular data model explain it to other people rather than sending them to the books or sending them to the vendor to find out how the data model looks. Because although sending them to the vendor is critical, the vendor doesn't know how your business runs. So mentoring is a very important part of this. Share your priorities and share your resource constraints with everyone who needs to know them. And that means anybody who might request a report, because they need to understand the battle you're fighting. They need to understand why somebody else's reports came first. And they need to have a very good understanding of how long it generally takes to get things through. Use an agile development methodology. Make sure people understand that this is an iterative approach. This is not something where they hand you a development specification and boom, a report comes out the other end 2 weeks later. That it involves them being involved answering questions, that they're going to make changes, and that that's okay. Make self-service options available as much as possible. That probably, among everything else, will make users more trusting of BI and more likely to use it and much more likely to get benefits from it. Make sure you have a data governance team to begin with, but if you don't have a big data governance team, make sure that for any given application area anyway, that everyone gets involved in agreeing on and defining business rules and data element meanings, so that you don't run into the situation where one organization thinks that the count of inpatient admissions means one thing and another organization thinks it means another, and maybe it doesn't even mean either of those. Give your BI team adequate resources in terms of tools and give them good cross-training. Send them off for the training. Get somebody in to mentor them. Give them the right tools, though, also. One of the things that I can't live without when I'm sitting down in front of my SQL coding is a particular tool that helps me to write my SQL code more quickly. It prompts me and it shows me errors and it does all kinds of cool things except for brewing coffee. It makes me a much, much faster coder. So if your BI team asks you for a tool like that, by all means, let them use whatever tools are going to make them work faster. Make sure that you have report stewards and that the users are making a commitment of their time to answer questions on a timely basis, to develop the design of the report. All right, and if this means that they have to come every 2 weeks for a face-to-face meeting, then that's what that means. Someone needs to take ownership of each and every BI initiative. So really every report that gets developed, somebody should be the go-to person to answer questions about that report. Whether it is how it should look, what data it should read, under what conditions, or somebody who will take responsibility if there's a quality issue with the data. We as developers find out a lot of that stuff before anybody else does, and we're not the ones to correct it, so there needs to be someone who will take ownership of that. Using a strong BI infrastructure with best practices, with standards, with documentation, and more importantly with oversight, with somebody who will actually make sure that people are coding using the right kinds of practices, that people's reports do look, according to the standards, and that they are completing their documentation. That's very, very important as well. So now it's time, if you have any questions, I'm putting my email address up there in case you have questions that come up later. But Jeff, do we have any questions?
Absolutely, we
in the
do.
chat box?
We do, and thank you. As we all appreciate your time, effort, and energy, and that's great insight. We have a bunch of questions, and we've got about 5 minutes left on the hour, so we'll whip through these. And like Diana said, if anybody needs to get a hold of her directly, please feel free to email her at dbodell@orchestratehealthcare.com. The first question is from Tom, and Tom is asking, what are different suggestions you can share regarding getting the BI team involved in the process early? You mentioned, one of the pitfalls is that they're not involved early enough. What are your thoughts in regards to getting them to the table earlier in the process?
Well, if it's at all possible to get with the people who are deciding even which EMR product to purchase, and get with them and explain to them the importance of the BI initiative with respect to the EMR project, then I think that you'll have a much better chance of that filtering down to the rest of the team, that they need to include you. I've seen people actually go so far, as to making sure that the BI team is part of the change control process. But, in terms of getting top executive involvement, you have to kind of push. You have to be a little bit pushy and say, here are the reasons that we need to be involved, and I really need your help in making sure that everybody involves us, bottom line.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Brian, and Brian asks, what are a couple of suggestions that you can provide regarding getting people to really take ownership of the project? You mentioned that's one of the issues is when there is no ownership. It seems like Brian's organization has that problem. What do you suggest in regards to having people step up and take ownership?
Well, frankly, if nobody's willing to take ownership of something, I would question whether or not that particular project is all that important. And I might even, say as much to them. I mean, if having a certain, if having the data is important enough to the users who are requesting it, then it should be important enough for somebody to say, okay, I'm going to be the person who answers all the questions. I mean, we're not asking for people to come over and sit with the report developer 24/7. We're talking about somebody taking the time when there's a question to answer it on a timely basis. And I think it really comes down to explaining to people why it is important that there be a person who takes responsibility for doing that. And again, if nobody is willing to step up, perhaps then that's part of your prioritization scheme. Maybe that's a little bit of tough love, but I think it's critical.
Sounds good.
Anything
well, thank
else?
you. Yeah, we have a couple more, and I know we're approaching on the hour, so we'll for the ones that we don't answer, we'll email everybody who has requested them, and we'll get answers to them. But I think this is an important one. They're all important, but I think this one probably a lot of individuals are asking. But with BI, if you don't have that executive level sponsorship, what are some of your strategies, or what are some of your approaches in regards to getting that executive level sponsorship?
Well, some of the things that have helped are making a presentation to top-level, the C-suite people of the kind of information that they can get, dashboards. Executives love dashboards. They love summary information so that, the more current the information, the better, and the more reliable the information, the better. And if they understand that with their support of the BI initiative, they will be able to have that level of information and make those kinds of predictive choices, then they'll be much more likely to back it up. And I think it's becoming less and less of an issue as we see more and more conferences out there in the healthcare community that directly address that question to executives, which is, what are you doing with business intelligence for your organization?
Great. Here's another one. You mentioned that BI and BI development can typically or sometimes get siloed from each other, and what are strategies, what are best ways to prevent the siloing of your business intelligence team?
Okay, that's a good question. And, I hate to say have meetings, but what I mean by have meetings is have weekly get-togethers of all of the team members where actually make a presentation. Someone makes a presentation that teaches something, whether it be your best SQL person talking about how indexes work, or your DBA talking about database issues, or whether it's the person who knows the ambulatory data model best, going over that data model to the people who don't know it. Have sessions where people share their knowledge, and that will bring people to the table because they have an incentive to get more educated, but it also gives them the opportunity to share what they know, what they're working on, and in the process you get a lot more interaction between people working on different projects. One of the other things that I find very effective, and I usually do this in each of my clients, is to have what we call Diana's Corner, for lack of a better term, and I wish there were a better term. And we'll do this weekly, and we'll sit down, and I will either come up with a topic that I feel that the team could get a better grasp on, or I'll have one of the team members do something. And by simply having that kind of get-together, we can attack and strategize a particular reporting issue that somebody on the team is having, and as a team help them to figure out how best to put the data together. That's incredibly useful. And it's not just coming together to have a meeting to say, well, I'm working on this, and I'm still waiting for so-and-so to get back to me on that. And I have better things to do, so let's get over with this, and that's how I typically keep people from getting completely siloed.
That's a great approach. And so we have a couple more, but we're a couple minutes over our time, so I'm gonna take this time to thank everybody for participating, and Diana, thank you very much for all your time. For those who don't have or haven't had their questions answered, we will have Diana email you directly. And once again, thank you very much for all your time, and have a great day.